I have no desire to be subtle today. So, did you catch it? Those who wait for the Lord shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. If a guy was going to get up in church and talk on Scout Sunday, I think most of us would pick this scripture. I didn't pick this scripture. This is the Old Testament lectionary reading for today. Now, that may not mean anything to you. The gist of it is there are churches all over the world who are studying this very passage today. But as far as I know, there is only one church who is celebrating the 50th anniversary of their scout troop with it. I was not here when Troop 479 was started. I want to point that out. Gifford Parkhurst was the first scoutmaster, that's him, with his son Mark, who was one of the first scouts in the troop. I was born when the troop was started, I have to admit, but I was way too young to know about Boy Scouts. The first I heard about Troop 479 was when I was a Cub Scout in Pack 479, which also met here at the church, down in the basement. And sometimes our meetings would overlap and we'd get to peek in on what the big kids were doing. They were so cool. They got to tie slings on each other. They could talk to each other with flags on sticks. They got to shoot guns in the church. They were BB guns, but there were guns in the church. The 60s were a different time, I hasten to point out. So while Cub Scouts was fun, Boy Scouts was cool, and I could not wait to get to the good stuff. So as soon as I could, back then you could join Boy Scouts when you were 11. So on my 11th birthday, July 15th, 1971, I joined Troop 479. 3 days later, on July 18th, 1971, the troop left for summer camp. So I went on a long-term camp out after having been a Boy Scout for exactly 3 days. And it was awesome. We cooked outside. We got to sleep in tents. There was a cave to explore. It was not a very good cave. But it was a cave, and I was 11, so it was really cool. In fact, the picture that we're using for the background today on the songs is the chapel from Camp Sasakwa in 1971 for my first summer camp. It was a great time. We even found a copperhead in our tent one day. Now, in retrospect, it was a bad idea to tell my mother about the copperhead in our tent when she and my father came down for parents' night, because it took a lot of convincing on his part for her to let me stay for the rest of camp. But he did, and I did, and it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship, as they say. I loved scouting. All of it, the camping, the hiking, the swimming, canoeing, knot tying. If you need a town lashed up, to this day, I am still your man. I love that stuff. But what they don't tell you, or maybe they do tell you, but since you're 11, you don't pay attention to that stuff, is that scouting is not about the fun activities. The purpose of scouting is to build community. We do the fun activities so the community is strong when we need it to be. That's why, by the time you're an Eagle Scout, you're required to have merit badges in, among others, citizenship in the world, citizenship in the nation, and citizenship in the community. Now, again, I don't want to be subtle. Did you notice that the building on the citizenship in the community merit badge looks just like our church? It has for 40 years before the church was even here, so it's an accident. But the activities for the merit badge are mostly concerned with community in the sense of town. But in my experience, most of the communities that we're a part of aren't defined by city limits. They're defined by the people that we choose to spend our time with. My mother and father knew that better than anybody I've ever known. They ran a donut shop just down the street here where Cafe 501 is now. That place was as much about building community as it was about coffee and donuts. And they both loved that aspect of it, even though they had to be there at 2 a.m. 6 days a week to start making donuts. As you can imagine, they were sort of early to bed people. But they understood that me being in scouting was an important part of me starting to build my own community. So they supported it in every way they could, regardless of how late they had to stay up. They put together chili suppers, they drove us on field trips, they were there for every court of honor, for every Parents' Day, for every camporee. Camporees, for those of you who are not scouts, is like a camp out on steroids. Every troop in the district, which is about a dozen troops, gets together, so it's, 200-300 people, and they have this huge weekend-long camp out with each other. And there's competitions, they do all kinds of Boy Scout stuff, pioneering and orienteering, and all the earrings that Boy Scouts really have fun with. And then at the end of the day, they get together for a huge campfire. Everybody gathers around this big fire, and they sing songs, and they do really bad skits. And they get awards from the competitions that day, and they get the new inductees for the Order of the Arrow, which I have to explain because everybody knows about Boy Scouts, but not everybody knows about the Order of the Arrow. So where's Joey? He's my prop. Joey, stand up. The guys in the white sash with the red arrow on it are members of the Order of the Arrow. It's an honor organization inside of Scouts, thank you, that are elected each year the best and the brightest of the troop. They get to go be part of the Order of the Arrow. These guys are the coolest of the cool. Now, because I'm telling you about this, as you might guess, in 1973, I was inducted into the Order of the Arrow at a big camporee campfire. Big bunch of Indian guys come down. They do this really impressive ceremony. They drag you down to be recognized, literally dragging you, by the way. And as you might guess, my mother and father were there in attendance. The campfire was awesome. The tap out, the Order of the Arrow ceremony was great. But afterward, as we were walking back to our troop's campsite, my father had a heart attack and collapsed. Now, let me leave for just a minute the drama of your father having a heart attack in front of you. I didn't see it this way at the time, of course, but in that moment, the community that we had spent years building sprang into action. Before I even knew what was going on, the man who had taught my first aid merit badge was working on my father. There was suddenly a pickup there. They had him loaded into the back with 3 trained adults giving him CPR, me and my mother loaded in the front, and we were off to the hospital before God got the news. This was long before cell phones, so the quickest way to get him to where he needed to be was to take him there, and we did. Nobody had to stop and discuss it. Everybody knew what they were supposed to do, and they did it. Now, it would be a happier story if, after all the great training and the quick action, he came through that great and lived a long life after. But the stories don't always end like you want them to. And my father died that night. But it's not the end of the story. Because just like the scouters at the camporee jumped into action, just like they trained for, over the next weeks and months, the communities that we were a part of jumped into action. There were people bringing us food, running errands for us, hauling me around places, but mostly just being there for us, letting us know that we are a part of the community. And the troop suddenly seemed to come up with a lot more activities that I was required to attend. And as a teenager, you don't see those things. But in hindsight, it was the scouting community that got me through a really bad time. People think of church as this, Sunday morning worship service. If that was all we did, we would have a pretty shallow faith. But it's the gathering together, whether it's for worship, for learning, for service, for camping, or just for sharing a meal. That act of coming together is what builds community. And that community becomes the hands of God reaching out to others. And when we need it, being reached out to ourselves. Today's scripture isn't just about eagles and youth and hiking. Let me quote a little bit of it. The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint and strengthens the powerless. That's where the church earns its keep, by being the hands of God that give power to the faint and strength to the powerless. Now, I got a lot of stories that I could tell about the church, or about the troop. Some are poignant, some are funny, some are pretty inappropriate to tell in church. But I can sum up what scouting has meant to me with one picture. Now, a lot of you are going to recognize the chapel. This was long before this room was built. The skinny kid in the middle is me. I'm receiving my Eagle Award right there. The man presenting it to me is Orrin Lee Peters, Scoutmaster of Troop 78 at the time, and one of the men in the truck the night we took my father to the hospital. He's here today, by the way. He's right here. He does not look any different today than he did when that picture was taken in 1977. Now, the FDA has not approved this claim, but scouting may be keeping you young. Just saying. On the right of the picture, in the blue suit, is Don Hunteman, who was my first scoutmaster. He was the one who took me to summer camp after I had been a scout for exactly 3 days. Between us is my mother. I don't know if you can see it. She's in a sling. She was recovering from shoulder surgery and put together an Eagle Scout Court of Honor and the reception on December 18th of that year with one arm tied in front of her back. That's how much she was dedicated to scouting. And on the left of the picture is Glenn Uthier, who was the scoutmaster of the troop when I got my Eagle. He was also my stepfather, because when my mother got remarried, of course it was to a man who understood the value of scouting to building community, even if the community is as small as a family. He was a great scoutmaster, and he was a great dad, which I think is really the same thing. He passed away about a year ago, and his service was in the chapel, right across the hall. That service, just like this one, was opened by Troop 479 presenting the colors, because that's how important scouting was to him, and that's how important he was to scouting. Community. I got my Eagle. I spent another 8 years in the troop after that. When they tell you that's the end, they lie. I was junior assistant scoutmaster, spent a couple of years as scoutmaster. I got my wood badge. I became a Brotherhood member of the Order of the Arrow, and finally left the troop when I moved to go to graduate school in 1986. Now, that's a whirlwind tour of my time with Troop 479. And that is only a glimpse of the impact that scouting has made in my life. But multiply that by 500, maybe 1,000 boys who have been a part of this troop here in this church over the last 50 years. Now multiply that by all their family members who have been touched by the troop. Now multiply it by all the people who have benefited from the service that the troop has provided for 50 years. Now, start multiplying that by all the other activities that go on in the church. You think you're playing basketball, or you're serving breakfast, or teaching Sunday school to 3-year-olds who aren't even listening, or singing in the choir, or eating a baked potato just to help the scouts out. But what you're really doing is creating community. That's what this congregation has done for over 100 years. And it's what this scout troop has done for 50. So as I finish up, let me show you something. Would all the current members of Troop 479 stand up that are in here? It's probably everybody now because we don't have the reception going on. Okay. Yeah, there's more of them out there. Okay. While you're standing, former members? Any former members of Troop 479 here today? I know that. There's a bunch of them because I just talked to them in the reception. Yeah. How about anybody who's had a family member in Troop 479? Yeah, stand up. There you go. And let's be honest, there are actually other scout troops out there that provide some okay service to the community. Anybody ever been a scoutmaster? Stand up. Scout of any kind? Been a Boy Scout? Been a Cub Scout? Come on, it was fun. You got to admit it. Yeah. How about this? Anybody here today who has just had a scout do something nice for them? Stand up. There you go. All right. If you're not standing yet, you may want to, because I can think of no better way to end than where it all started. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the man who sowed the seeds 50 years ago that are still bearing fruit today. The first Scoutmaster of Troop 479, Gifford Parkhurst.